Okay, we're recording. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mad Feminist Activism and the Global Feminist Movement, a dialogue on and of dissent. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our panelists first for their work and to express to everyone gathered here today that I am very grateful that we are recognizing the value of having a dialogue on this subject, as well as I would like to thank the Seneca Falls Dialogues for accepting a Mad Feminist Dialogue panel for inclusion in the 2020 conference, as it is such an important time for us to gather in dialogue on Mad Feminist activism. And Christina, if you don't mind allowing people, admitting them into the room while I'm speaking,
Yep,
that would be
I've got that.
wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you so much. My name is Jessica Lowell Mason. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I am a graduate student in the Global Gender and Sexuality Studies Department at the University at Buffalo, a co-founder of a feminist madness and mental health literacy organization called Mad Women in the Attic, a psychiatric survivor, and a lesbian mother of two girls that are with me in the room, but are doing some other things right now. I am honored to be moderating this dialogue today and to have my daughters here with me, even if they are listening to other things while we're doing it. Last January, prior to the global pandemic, I received a call for proposals from my graduate department, and it was for the Seneca Falls Dialogues. I was completely unfamiliar with the dialogues, but I was struck by the idea of a feminist gathering of some sort that did not call itself a conference. The word dialogue signaled to me something outside of the academic status quo. And this combined with the conference's focus on bringing together community activists and academics, not just academics, to be in dialogue with one another and with a larger community is what prompted me to submit a proposal for a Mad Feminist Dialogue. The conference's theme, Disrupting the Past, Questioning the Present, and Building the Future, provides direction for this dialogue, which aims to bring together mad activists and scholars to discuss old and new directions in mad feminist activism and to consider mad feminist activism's or mad activism's role in a larger feminist agenda. So our dialogue will consider the problems within, the problems facing, and the implications of mad feminist activism in the way that addresses rights and responsibilities with regard to oppression and oppressed communities, including Black and Indigenous people of color and LGBT folks living with psychiatric labels or who have had psychiatric experiences. By exchanging ideas and sharing experiences on mad feminist activism, it is my hope that this dialogue will serve as a moment of mad grassroots organizing. So if you go to the bottom of our screen, there is a chat feature toward the middle of the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you click on that, you should, to the right, there is two links that I put up. And we have two Google documents that we are sharing with everyone who is present at this dialogue today as a way of offering an alternative and maybe more expansive and flexible space for engaging in the dialogue. One of the documents includes a list of questions that I have posed to help give direction and shape to the dialogue. The other is a notepad where we invite all attendees to engage in the dialogue by sharing thoughts, questions, impressions, and responses. So if you are not comfortable or for any other reason don't want to pose a question during this moment, but want to pose a question in the dialogue in general, please feel welcome to use the Google Docs to do that or to share thoughts there as well. Our brilliant and wonderful dialogue presenters are Vesper Moore, Tanya Aho, Ajilsa Fernandez, Delphine Brody, and Maria Rovito. They all have worked very hard in planning this and have contributed so importantly to this dialogue. And I am so grateful that we are here together and excited to listen to what each of you has to say today. Our panelists are going to introduce themselves and will spend a few minutes responding to the subject of the dialogue. After each panelist speaks, we will move into an open dialogue with everyone who is here. And now I would please invite you to give your attention to our first speaker, Vesper Moore.
Thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Vesper Moore. I use they, them pronouns. I am a MAD activist and community activist, largely a psychiatric survivor, and I identify as a MAD Indigenous queer person. Just to start off today, the way in which I envision MAD activism in the global feminist movement is when you think about every social justice movement that is currently out there, and their ideologies, around what is, madness and survivorship and what we understand as common human experiences within MAD activism, they are often referring to as mental illness. In truth, mental illness being something that does not actually have biomarkers in the brain, with minimal genetic factors, and is heavily influenced by environments and experience, could be referred to as social experiences, right? So we understand this in MAD activism. We understand that these are natural human experiences. We understand that reclaiming the term madness is in direct opposition to the biomedical model of mental illness and psychiatry at large. Simultaneously, most social justice movements don't understand that. I'll use the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a movement that I'm very passionate about. For example, I have gone to several protests and heard that, racism is a mental illness. And thinking about some of the ideas behind that, people are trying to refer to someone as damaged, as someone who needs to be fixed, as someone who is damaging to society. And the idea that the person who is damaging to society is mad folk at large is a whole new form of mad prejudice that feeds into mad oppression. Now, another piece to this, when I think about MAD activism, is collective decolonization within the Western medical model. And I mean negative aspects of the Western medical model. Western medicine contributes in a lot of different ways, but in other ways harms many a person with archaic medications such as Haldol, Thorazine, lithium, and otherwise. There are so many people who are dying from treatments. And often we put people in social conditions that are traumatic experiences, trauma absent of the biomedical model, but as an experience lens, emotional distress, if you will. And these experiences can lead to an array of responses, human responses. And those responses are then treated as illness, and then a cure is marketed. And then that marketed cure is then given back to the illness that was created. Now, there's a lot of elements of madness for me that I feel are natural and inherent to who I am. And then there are also negative aspects of that emotional distress that I know are a purely crafted means of the weaponized capitalist system we live in today. And I am urging the global feminist movement to take a moment and think about, if we're truly going to be intersectional about our feminism, if we're truly going to include everyone, include mad folk, include psychiatric survivors, include psychiatric disabilities, or folks with psychiatric disabilities, and think about these experiences. And don't think about it singularly as someone is ill or inherently broken. Think about how in the media, people who are labeled with mental health diagnoses are portrayed. Think about how on a policy level, different groups are impacted and diagnosed. I mean, thinking about diagnoses historically, such as the diagnoses of negritude by the father of psychiatry, Benjamin Rush, in which the only cure was to become white, and that Black people had a form of leprosy that spread subservience onto white people. Or drapetomania, the diagnosis in which individuals would run away from their slave masters, or their slave masters would become too attached to them. Or the fact that homosexuality was a diagnosis up until recently, up until the 70s. I mean, and then thinking about in 2013, how asexuality was a diagnosis, or trans identities largely were a diagnosis. How many human identities actually have to be a diagnosis till we realize that mental illness at large is a farce that is harming human beings? And when we think about how colonization at large impacts our society and how we can decolonize and reach our roots of human connection, we could put relationship and human connection at the root of everything that we do. Firstly, before we consider anything else, I urge that lens to be, thought of and received. I think in my own experience, I reclaim mad identities as something that for me, madness is something that is against convention. I question even the very notion of sanism when we use the term sanism, because what is sanity in the first place? I mean, if sanity is convention, then sanism can apply, but thinking about how madness within itself is everything against convention. And it has its intersections with queerness, it has its intersections with reclaiming cultural experiences. I myself had to reclaim my indigenous roots, being raised a Hispanic person, but knowing that my roots as a Taino person in the Caribbean, which is largely colonized, that took some time, and that is an identity I had to reclaim. I view madness in the same way and queerness in the same way, all of these intersecting identities. And I view madness absent of the psychiatric system, because I think that that's actually important. And my mad experiences both intersect, but also have representation absent of psychiatry. And then my psychiatric survivorship, although it's something that intersects simultaneously, is something of its own. And I think as we move forward with this dialogue, I would also like people to think about how can we abolish many of the aspects of the psychiatric system at large that are harmful. And I don't mean that, just completely eliminate a system all at once. I'm talking about abolishing the current system so we can rebuild a new system. I mean, inevitably, whatever we will build will be another system, but one that centers human connection first, rather than labeling social illness or illness at large. When we think about how psychiatry is one of the only entities in the world that actually isn't regulated by anyone, and the fact that that is occurring within itself is an issue. Many of the medications, through the pharmaceutical industries, are regulated primarily by research that is done by marketing researchers. Whereas psychiatry itself as a practice is put at the very top of everything else. A psychiatrist could put politicians in mental institutions, police officers in mental institutions, social workers, any person of power, and it can actually deem them ill. And in the words of Bonnie Burstow, an anti-psychiatrist and activist, it's a king-like power. that psychiatrists have over the human population as a whole, that within itself is something that I'd like folks to consider today. Psychiatry is largely white. It's largely run by cis men. It puts a population of folks who don't actually understand the suffering of many oppressed groups in power to craft illness. When I think about madness, I think about many different experiences, whether if that's extreme experiences at large, extreme states of being, hearing voices, experiencing visions, things that prior to colonization were viewed as either complicated gifts or things that could actually give insight to other people. I know for myself, many experiences that could be deemed and labeled by psychiatry as a psychotic break, for me, have actually meant states of enlightenment that have allowed me to move forward in my life. Without what is referred to as a breakdown, there wouldn't be the breakthrough. And that's been crucial. So just considering that as we move forward in our dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vesper. Our next panelist is Tanya Aho.
Thank you, Vesper, for those really amazing opening remarks. I'm going to preface with an apology. I'm in a house full of humans right now, and I have a hard time following my own thoughts when there's a lot of background noise. And so I've typed out my comments, and I'm just going to try and slowly read them out. Everyone can follow along. I just put the link in the Google Docs. So if you prefer to process by reading, you can do that along with me. So hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Aho. That's spelled T-A-N-J-A-A-H-O. My pronouns are they, them. And I am a psychiatric survivor, a person who's neuroqueer, genderqueer, and just basic queer, and who's a teacher currently situated on traditional Piscataway lands. That's P-I-S-C-A-T-A-W-A-Y. At a university that has acknowledged its connections to racial capitalism vis-a-vis slavery, but that is still struggling to formulate its position as a settler colonizer institution on unceded Piscataway territory. In other words, American University, in what is currently known as Washington, D.C., like most universities, has not come to understand itself in relation to its violent history of white supremacist, cis-heteropatriarchal, able nationalist colonialism. As a neuroqueer, genderqueer, and basic queer teacher who's part of this institution, I grapple with this question every day. So today I wanted to share with you a few reflections on how I attempt to use my classrooms to create mad feminist community that does not recenter the violence of whiteness. I chose to speak about the classroom because it currently is my major locus of activist work. I used to be much more involved in community organizations, care networks, and alternative kinship structures. But due to a recent move, various health issues, and now a global pandemic, I have had to reorient my activist desires, at least for the short term, to mostly the classroom. So as someone with a teaching-focused full-time position in academia, I'm lucky to feel a bit more freedom to shape my classrooms in alternative ways. First of all, I'm very open with students about my access needs as an autistic, chronically ill professor. Rarely do students get to experience that kind of openness, an openness that I consider a much more radical basis from which to construct a community of learning. During the semester's first class session, I discuss in detail with students what radical access means, and I allow students to reconsider their access needs outside of a rights-based accommodations model. I aspire to model my classrooms on what Mia Mingus, that's M-I-N-G-U-S, calls access intimacy. And even though classrooms are inherently ableist, and I'd be happy to talk about that later, I've experienced classrooms that can still create access intimacy for many of us. So what does access intimacy look like in the times of COVID? Well, for me, it means checking in with my students every session about where they are at, what they can bring, and allowing them to be present or not in whatever way works for them. That means never requiring attendance or participation. It means allowing students the choice of whether they have their cameras on or not. It means allowing students to participate verbally or through the chat box. Prior to online classes, I would have students use note cards or other feedback systems. It means being honest about where I am at, what I can bring that day, and then shaping our learning trajectory together. To me, it means always trusting my students. The more cynical will say, well, what about those who cheat? But I'm not interested in wasting my energy time on trying to police students. I want to invest my energy time in students who want to get something out of the class. And I also want to be humble about the ways in which students might not feel comfortable telling me what is going on in their lives. And oftentimes I think these students might not know how to understand themselves, what they are going through. Creating access intimacy to me means teaching with generosity and kindness, offering care and support, and allowing my students to flourish. Of course, there are limits to the ways in which I can expand the classroom. I do have to give grades. I have to turn them in at a certain time. I only have so many hours in the day devoted to work. These are very real limits that oftentimes curtail how my disabled, mad, neuroqueer, and chronically ill students can flourish, especially those who are BIPOC, LGBTQ, poor, undocumented, etc. So in other words, those who have been historically excluded from higher education and continue to be unsupported and discriminated against in many settings. Even with incompletes and the most generous deadlines, I see these students dropping classes and dropping out over and over, and even more so now during the global pandemic. The institution continues to set limits to my mad feminist pedagogy, and one day I hope to be able to work in a setting that is a community-based effort outside of settler colonial institutional structures. Until then, I continue to provide content that teaches students to understand themselves as they are situated in this white supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal, able nationalist, settler colonialist academic institution. I know that that's a mouthful, and to those who are not used to hearing these words, they can seem alienating. So let me put it this way. I strive to have my students, who are mostly white at a predominantly white institution that caters to the 1% of this country, feel the discomfort of being displaced from the center of the curriculum. Every class, no matter what topic I teach, opens with sessions on settler colonialism, the lands we're occupying, and knowledge about Indigenous issues. I created an Introduction to Disability Studies class for which the materials are 100% created by BIPOC folks. I pay people and communities whose knowledge I use in the classroom. I channel additional funding to local communities and others that we learn through in my classes. I share with my students the ways I'm trying to inhabit an inherently violent institution in more ethical ways. Together, we question the separation between academia and activism, between scholarly and popular writing, between professionals and community members. These are unsettling questions for students who are just being indoctrinated into a social hierarchy that is driven by ableist educational elitism. But to me, these questions remain at the heart of my mad feminist pedagogy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Our next panelist is Ajilsa Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone. One second. My name is Ajilsa Fernandez, and I am a brown, queer, non-binary Latinx person. My identity plays a major role in these conversations since both feminism movement and MAD movement have excluded the voices, stories, experiences, and skills of people like me. Since the beginning of the suffrage movement, we see the involvement of Black women, formerly enslaved and free Black women, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Maria W. Stewart, Sarah Raymond, and Marianne Shad Carey were active in the women's rights circle in late 1840s. Free Black women assumed leadership roles at multiple women's rights gatherings throughout 1850s and 1860s. And in 1851, former slave Sojourner Truth delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech at the National Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. After the Civil War, in order to tailor to white women, specifically white women in the South, the suffrage changed. Once joining with the causes of abolitionists, now stood with racism, even as far as supporting white supremacy. The messaging in 1840s changed after the Civil War towards hostility and violence towards the same women who fought alongside white women for those rights. The 19th Amendment did not extend to women of African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and American Indian heritage. Black women and women of color were able to finally vote in 1965 after the Civil Rights Movement, which was led by Black folks. In the second wave, we see more Black women join and lead, but other women of color are left out, especially transgender women, more specifically, transgender women of color. In fact, during the Stonewall riot, Marsha P. Johnson, a Black woman, and Sylvia Rivera, a brown woman, were demanding their rights as transgender women because they were left out of feminism movement and the gay rights movement. There was no place for the trans community, to the point that they had to build their own community alongside other trans folks. In that second wave, we see what we call TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminism. Women who claimed and still claim that transgender women aren't women at all, and that they don't share the same struggles, so therefore they can't join the movement. The MAD movement is the same thing. It has been led, it was, and still is predominantly white, cis, and heterosexual. The Black and brown folks who have joined the movement have not received the recognition they deserve. And more so, many Black and brown members feel out of place in this movement due to the lack of representation. And so queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and LGBTQIA+ folks are left out. Until we break away from white supremacy and upholding the status quo, which is white, we cannot begin to address the intersectional issues that lays between brown, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, madness, and feminism. A quick example is institutions. The word itself excludes Black and brown folks from experiences. Many of our ancestors were not in institutions, but rather at home, since family members cannot pay for their care. Did that mean that they suffered any less? Absolutely not. We erase those experiences by using the word institutions. Another example is that our ancestors had long invented grounding techniques and used herbal remedies, but it has been whitewashed, colonized, stolen, and resold to white folks so long after murders of Black and brown folks who practice these techniques. There are various intersectionality between queerness, trans, Black, and brown madness and feminism, but it cannot be addressed in a white supremacist space. We continue to be excluded from both of these spaces, madness and feminism, as Black women were during the suffrage, although we are very much a part of these movements. In order to address the madness of people like me at the intersections of feminism, these movements must be anti-racist and truly intersectional, meaning trans, gender nonconforming, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people with disabilities are not left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ajilsa. Our next panelist is Delphine Brody.
Thank you. I'm Delphine Brody. I've been part of the feminist movement for 27 years and MAD activism for 22 years. It was my life experiences as a MAD disabled queer trans woman and survivor of child sexual abuse, sexual and relationship violence, and medical abuse. Those will be my only references to those. Sorry if I should have said content note. That spurred me to get involved. I'm sorry, those will not be my only references. Content note, I will be discussing those topics, but without graphic descriptions. That spurred me to get involved despite exclusion of my MAD disabled trans identities from feminism, and despite erasure of pretty much all of my identities other than MAD from the MAD movement through most of this time. As Ajilsa talked about, it has long aspired to be a single issue movement, which is illusory and exclusionary. I co-founded and currently organize 5 networks, collectives and collaboratives in the greater Sacramento region, and 2 Turtle Island-wide collaborative projects. An autonomous mutual aid peer support called Mad Love Underground, here in unceded occupied Nisenan land, so-called Sacramento. That's also, I co-founded an organization vying for women and femmes to end the rape culture in our local social justice movement and communities, called the Sacramento Women's Council, the Trans and Non-Binary Housing Collective to support safe, permanent, affordable housing within the trans and non-binary communities, the Grief and Trauma Healing Support Collaborative to hold brave space for people experiencing the heavy emotions of grief and trauma, the Sacramento Eviction Defense Collaborative to protect tenants from a tsunami of evictions that have begun even during this global pandemic. And on the Turtle Islands scale, we have recently started the Western Mutual Aid Peer Support, or Western MAPS Collaborative, to train and assist local peer support organizing throughout Turtle Island, and Gender Justice in the Movement to call for a culture shift to center and affirm trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, intersex, and two-spirit people within the MAD peer support user survivor movement. I see madness and feminism as inherently connected in several ways. The white settler colonial cis heteropatriarchy, socioeconomic class elitism, and ableism that dominates our society is quick to label any deviation from the worldview, beliefs, emotions, and perceptions of cisgender, heterosexual, white non-disabled, ruling class men as mentally disordered or mad. I'm going to slow down for the ASL. Oh, I'm sorry, there's no ASL. I'll slow down for the captainers. Hence, women, trans and non-binary folks and disabled folks, especially those who are Black, disabled, and women and femmes of color are overrepresented in the mental health system and more likely to be pathologized as dangerous or gravely disabled and treated involuntarily. Also, each time it is debunked as a fallacy and derided as bigotry, white settler colonial cis heteropatriarchy, ableism, and class elitism must upgrade its self-serving rationale, requiring ever more sophisticated gaslighting in order to justify the refusal of the privileged to concede power. Therefore, intersectional feminists who have shown ourselves to be especially adept at identifying these cynical manipulations are typically among the first to be singled out as mentally disordered or mad in an attempt to malign our characters, discredit our analyses, and silence our voices. Despite having been majority populated by women from its inception, for most of its history, MAD activism has nonetheless largely left whiteness, colonialism, cis heteropatriarchy, socioeconomic class elitism, and ableism unexamined and unchecked. insofar as it has attempted to define itself as a single issue movement, erasing the struggles and contributions of mad women and femmes, especially queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, women of color, and perpetuating a toxic culture where racism, misogyny, sexual and relationship violence, transphobia, classism, and ableism all too often go unchallenged. Only over the past 15 years has a more intersectional approach slowly emerged, and that approach and its leading voices remain very marginalized within today's professionalized peer movement, which has been heavily co-opted by a mental health system that functions as an arm of the carceral state. Yet intersectional mad feminisms have nonetheless been birthed and nurtured in unfunded grassroots mutual aid peer support networks. Transformative justice pods and disability care teams, in mad feminist street theater, street art, avant-garde music, and dance. It can be seen in the evolution the evolution of mad feminist organizations like Fireweed Collective, Wildflower Alliance, Mad Women in the Attic, and Mad Love Underground. While single issue mad activism has long worked at cross purposes with feminism, insofar as it's reinforced rather than challenged rape culture and misogyny, even as mainstream feminism has been dominated by white women and marginalized the voices of and struggles of mad women, especially those of mad queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color, and disabled women and femmes. I believe it is not too late for us to change this picture and co-create a truly intersectional mad feminism, paving the way to this future are organizations that center mad women, QT, BIPOC, and disabled folks like Fireweed Collective, projects that challenge psychiatric oppression, eugenics, and rape culture like Sins Invalid, and the Disability Justice Culture Club, transformative justice and community accountability work by groups like Project NIA and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, and collaborations that bring together mad women and femmes, sex workers, drug users, trans and non-binary people, and survivors like Sacramento's Grief and Trauma Healing Support Collaborative. As a mad feminist, I helped organize and table at a mass feminist march last week as part of a national Women's March action. Unfortunately, in failing to name mad women in institutions and behind bars, most of the speakers erased our struggle. And this was no accident. Much more work is still needed to counter the racism and sanism of mainstream feminism. And this can only be accomplished by centering mad women and femmes and foregrounding our voices and our stories at rallies and in the media. I recently gave a TV news interview about mad gifts and about how experiences of child sexual abuse and sexual and relationship violence as an adult shaped my worldview, both creating the conditions of my body-mind that cis heteropatriarchy saw fit to label mentally disordered, and lighting the mad fire of resistance within me that has been a guiding light in my struggle for mad justice, safety, agency, dignity, and beloved community. Mad feminism embraces women and femmes as whole human beings on our own terms. It recognizes the many intersections of oppression and the profound inequities among women and among mad people, as well as those between mad women and mad men, between white mad women and femmes and mad BIPOC women and femmes of color, between cis and trans women, queer and straight women, sex workers and non-sex workers. Mad feminism rejects claims to colorblindness, rejects respectability and assimilation for queer and trans and BIPOC people, and rejects notions of worthiness and beauty based on ableist, looksist, and sizeist standards. Mad feminism is quintessentially important in breaking down barriers of misogyny and rape culture in the mad movement, as well as sanism and ableism in the feminist movement. When we unite and grow in an intersectional movement, we can participate in many movements. As an openly mad queer trans woman and activist, I'm active within numerous struggles, and I'm not going to list them because I think my time is probably up, but I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delphine. Our last panelist is Maria Rovito.
Hi, so thank you all for coming. So my dialogue is mostly related to literature and mad women in literature because that's what I study, but I will tie it to activism. And I just want to note, I do have a little bit of a content warning. I do discuss menstruation and psychiatric abuse. So if you're uncomfortable with that, just mute me. So my name is Maria Rovito. So my last name is Rovito. And I'm a PhD candidate in American Studies at Penn State University, where I study American literature, disability studies, and women's and gender studies. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I also teach disability studies here at Penn State alongside English and literature. I identify as a mad woman. This has been a lifelong process, beginning when I was 10 years old. When I started menstruating at 9, my moods became unleashed, triggering a decades-long battle with family doctors, gynecologists, psychologists, and psychiatrists regarding my emotions. I was diagnosed with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD, when I was 11 years old, and later endometriosis this summer during the pandemic. So endo is like a whole nother ball of wax I won't get into. Every doctor framed my madness as a biological issue, yet no one considered why I was becoming mad in this way. I decided when I was in my 20s that it was not me who had the problem, but rather the patriarchy placed these burdens of being a woman on me at the young age of 9. In this way, I view madness and being mad as a political identity and state of being rather than a biological condition. It was not up to me to fix or cure my own mood disorder, as doctors always framed it, but rather I believe that our Western patriarchal sanist society should transform itself to resolve the trauma that girls, women, and non-binary folks face regarding madness. In terms of defining sanism, I view sanism as a way to describe sane privilege to people who don't see themselves as mad or neurodiverse. That is, having a mad identity is a recognition of the oppression and marginalization I face for not experiencing the world as a non-mad person might. Being mad has a long history within my family. In the 1960s, my great-grandmother, an Irish immigrant who had 12 children and married 3 times, went mad and was locked in an attic for a week by her daughter. She escaped only for the police to find her and put her in a psychiatric institution where she died. I believe that she was not just mentally ill, as her doctors framed it, but rather she was filled with rage from years of living in a society that devalued women. As many people have told me, she was truly a living representation of the mad Creole woman, Bertha Mason, from Charlotte Bronte's Victorian novel, Jane Eyre, which was published in 1847. I believe that my great-grandmother shared much of the frustration and rage that Bertha carried in the novel and expressed by literally burning down Thornfield Hall. I inherited this rage, which comes out in my own writing. My literary research is quite focused on the American writer Sylvia Plath, who wrote the coming-of-age novel, The Bell Jar, which was published in 1963, as well as a plethora of poems, short stories, letters, and journals. As many of you might know from historical and cultural tropes, Plath has been canonized as a mad woman who was freed of her suffering through her suicide in 1963. And I use that sarcastically. I highly don't believe that. My research tries to show that this cultural narrative of Plath largely isn't true. Instead, I believe that Plath was a brilliant and luminous woman who devoted much of her life to her work and her children. Plath's husband, the British poet Ted Hughes, fueled this depressive narrative of Plath after her death, telling critics and scholars that Plath was indeed mentally ill. However, using archival materials and newly acquired Plath sources, I hope to demystify Plath and cast her as a woman living in a patriarchal, sanist society that pathologizes mad women. Similar to Plath, I had my own mental breakdown when I was in college and was placed in a psychiatric system that largely didn't care how I felt and didn't understand the patriarchal forces against me as a young woman. In this sense, I relate so much to Plath and Bertha Mason and believe that the typical cultural sanist construction of Plath does real harm to the girls, women, and non-binary folks who enjoy her work as well. Plas work has given me an agency as a mad woman that no type of medical authority or establishment can take away from me. I hope to show in my work in this speech that girls can push back against sanist cultural practices that cause so much bodily and emotional damage. It is my hope that feminist mad studies, which is the term I use in my own work, can create mad positive thinking and experiences for girls and non-binary folks that don't set them up for a life of trauma. Using both Jane Eyre and the bell jar in my own teaching, I hope to demonstrate to my students that they too can rebel against the patriarchal confinements of psychiatry. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Can our other moderator from the Seneca Falls Dialogues, Christina, please switch us back to the gallery mode? Just formally, I've done it on my screen, but I want to make sure that we can and have that for the rest of the time here. So we have until, I believe it's 11:45 Eastern Standard Time together. If people would like to pose questions, there are two ways that we can do it. One is you can raise your hand or use the hand raise button, which is again on that, I believe, I'm not seeing it on mine right now. Is anyone seeing the hand raise button? There should be a hand raise button. Yeah, so we can hopefully use that, or raise your hand if you have a video on, or you can use the chat box to write a question that you would like to ask our panelists to respond to. And I would also say that the panelists can also ask each other questions based on the listening that we've just done with these profound contributions. So would anyone like to, from our audience first, like to pose a question for the panelists, just in response to what you've been listening to or what you have been reading in the document? And do any of our panelists have any cross topics or anything that someone else spoke about that they would like to inquire more about or respond to in some way? We have a question over here. Oh, thank you, Tanya. Hi, I just saw Tamar, is it? Would you like to speak?
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Enjoyed listening to everybody. I'm from Birmingham in England. There was one thing that I was thinking as I was listening to everybody was that we're all talking about difference and almost kind of tripping over all these different words we've got to describe difference and all these little kind of groups. In the end, it's almost kind of like a sort of how to describe this? With so many little groups, it almost makes up one big group. And I was just wondering what people thought about that, because it's is this making sense to people? That we're talking about difference, but a lot of it really it all boils down to the same thing. It's about tolerance. So yeah, I just wondered, just thought I'd kind of throw that in and see what responses people had.
Yes, and any of the panelists, please feel free to respond as you wish. Does someone want to start? And maybe a way of sort of thinking about this is, with so many different groups and different agendas that those groups hold, are there ways, how is solidarity formed through all of those different groups? And is that solidarity, is that something we want? What is solidarity? That's another kind of thing. Like, for mad feminist activism, is it a helpful term?
I want to quote Audre Lorde on this, who has famously said, "For it is not difference which immobilizes us, but silence. And there are so many silences to be broken." And I think that it's critical that we keep that truth alive in our movements today, and always remember to look at who might not be in the room and whose voices and experiences may be silenced in this space that we're in, and to to find ways to center those people in their voices.
Thanks, cheers. And I suppose the other part of it really was, and I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition, tripping over words again, but just thinking that each panelist was talking about exclusion, and I was just thinking that if any of these, any of the talks have been given perhaps in other spaces, the language would feel quite exclusionary in itself, even to the even to the groups that we're talking about. So yeah, I was just wondering what you thought about that. It's almost as though we've kind of developed a dialogue or a language that's exclusionary that kind of mirrors the exclusion that we receive. So I was just wondering what people thought about that, or I don't know. I'll chuck it over to you, but hopefully you know what I'm chatting about. I am sort of an academic. I choose to use, colloquialisms.
I think maybe each of our panelists could say something about that. I think it's a point that I know that I struggle with. And what about exclusion? What about exclusionary language?
Maybe I should say something about that. So first off, I really like your hair. It's awesome. Yeah. So in terms of madness and identifying as mad, so the way I frame it to my students is I view being mad as a political identity. And I said this in my talk. And what I mean by that is I don't think, in my opinion, you don't have to have a psychiatric diagnosis to identify as mad. I view those as like totally different things. So I think I think just identifying as mad and being a mad ally creates solidarity in that regard, in terms of like the mad pride movement and mad feminism. So is that helpful at all?
Well, I think if I'm correct, the question is about how the language that we're using, even in some of the speeches that we're giving today, is still exclusionary. And, how do we feel about that? And what can we do about that? And I know, Ajilsa, you were trying to maybe say something.
So this is Ajilsa. And as a brown folk with all these intersections in my life as well, I think Delphine mentioned some resources that we can lean to. The exclusionary words exist in white supremacy spaces. Absolutely. I don't think that that's the case for other spaces. And I think this is why more Black and brown folks, and with the intersection of transgender, queerness, disability, etc., I think that this is why we're beginning to create our own spaces. Because for so long, we have tried to force our ways, like Black women during suffrage. And in that second wave, like, listen to me, please listen to me. Let's walk together. Let's do this together. And they're like, no, only whites, you're less, only whites. So now we see this break and we're like, you know what? We're not even gonna count them in. They don't care for us. We're gonna just deviate and just create spaces with allies. And so we should look at the spaces who are doing it right. There are spaces who are doing it right. And Delphine mentioned those resources: Since Invalid, Disability Justice, I forget the last part of it, Delphine. Fireweed collectives. So looking at these spaces that are truly intersectional, they really speak about feminism at the intersection of race, at the intersection of gender and sexuality, and they're really not exclusionary. In fact, white people, just like Black people and transgender folks, they find themselves in this space and they're like, oh my God, I feel at home. Why do I feel at home? And it's because these spaces are created in equity. There isn't a supremacy of people of color, nor a supremacy of whites. It's all equity. And there's an exchange of voices between white, Black, and transgender, etc. voices.
Do others want to respond to this as well?
I would like to. I think that there's an importance between, you know, there's almost this line, right, between like representation and then simultaneously like where representation leads into tokenism and where exclusion and exclusion of language, you know, it can be important representation to have that language in specific spaces or bring that language to other spaces, which can be exclusionary of other identities inherently. I think the state of being is you know, the state of living is so complex. There's so much to, you know, human beings that it's important for us to try to represent as many of those identities as possible. And particularly as we're decolonizing our society, like I was talking about earlier, you will find that a lot of the identities that we're finding, we'll find more and more and more and more and more and more. And what that truly is that we're trying to get back to the baser root of almost this interconnection between all human beings inherently that exists naturally, very indigenous ideals. And as society is collectively healing, representation of specific, you know, social groups will be necessary. And both the reclamation and the pursuit of justice will be important in that process too, and it has been, and it's happening, and it'll continue to happen until hopefully one day every social group has its own space and representation is there across the board. And yes, I think this is very much a disability justice lens of collective access, collective liberation, and sustainability moving forward for social movements and social groups.
And this is Ajilsa. I just added them to the chat box. Some of the spaces there are very inclusive.
Do others on the panel or in the dialogue want to respond to this before we maybe take another question or talk about another issue? Because we could certainly continue to discuss this. Okay. I would just, are there other audience members who might want to ask a question now or to share a thought? Yes, yes.
Hi, my name is Kendall. I use she, her. And so I'm finishing up my undergraduate degree and I'm interested in pursuing like even more like my PhD and my getting my master's and everything like that. And my question is to those of you who are persons of academia, how have you dealt with the pushback from either like the institution you work at or other people in your field with being a part of mad feminism or in trying to include mad feminism in your school or in your classroom? And have you found it difficult to have or gain support from other scholars in academia? And I would also extend the question to those who are outside of academia, you know, just in your profession.
Okay, would anyone like to respond to this?
Maybe I should talk for a bit about this. So during the first semester of graduate school for me, that was 2016, I asked for disability accommodations for my madness per se. And I found that the institution I was at was like incredibly ableist and sanist towards me. I was actually, I was like kicked out of my university for having a disability and having a mental illness. And yeah, I think it's a tricky line, I would say, as to just as far as disclosure in higher education. There's a great essay about this. It's called The Mad Border. It's by Shada Kafai. It's on Disability Studies Quarterly. And it's all about how higher education institutions, if you live on the boundary between sane and insane, it's really difficult because you're almost actively excluded by through your identity. So I think you have to be very careful about disclosure and who you're disclosing to. Like I don't disclose to my students about anything, and even my like dissertation advisor, he doesn't know that I have a mental illness. And I don't use mental illness like in a biological term. I'm just saying that to like say my diagnosis. But yeah, I just think you have to be very careful. I hope that was helpful. I don't think it was very helpful, but.
Hi, this is Tanya speaking. Yeah, just to add on to what Maria was saying, I think there's a fine line you have to walk when you work in like a white supremacist, ableist institution, where you have to figure out who you can trust and who you can talk to. I found a lot of solidarity in disability studies circles. There's a lot of MAD identified folks who, we end up at the same conferences. We support each other online and, through check-ins and doing other things to help each other out. But I think for me, the most important question is, how do I provide a role model to students? So in what ways do I disclose while not risking my own position, because my status of being in this country and of having a livable income is based on my continuation in that institution, right? And so I think if you're thinking about going into higher education, the question just has to be for yourself, to what extent are you able to engage in these kinds of negotiations and having to sometimes leave parts of yourself out of certain spaces? But that's of course something that we all do in different ways all the time, right? Except I think for the kinds of spaces that Vesper and Ajilsa have pointed to that are safer spaces for folks who tend to always have to leave like most of themselves outside of the room. I mean, academia is it's like any other workplace, right? That's part of like a capitalist and white supremacist structure that we live in. But I can give an example. So when I was I was trying to organize a disability studies symposium, just to sort of help everyone understand how we can think about access as not just an accommodations-based, rights-based model, but like what access actually feels like when it's radical, when it's transformative, right? When it feels, those of us who have been in those like crip solidarity spaces know what those feel like, and it's just magical. And so I wanted people at my institution to have that experience. And once we were actually in a space together that I was mostly able to shape in ways that were really, considerate of a lot of different access needs, it felt really good, but the way there was really hard. And I had to do a lot of explaining. So you'll have to spend a lot of energy explaining to people, okay, why are we using, not person first, but identity first language, right? I made a call that said, all disabled students, faculty, and staff are invited to this. I got so much pushback about using that language. And you'll just have to think about, how like every step of the way, am I willing to either explain things? And this goes a little bit back to that previous question too, that Tamara was asking about that language, right? How do I get people, how much time and energy can I spend explaining to people, like, where has this language come from, right? Why is it important to me to say I'm an autistic person and I don't want to be called a person with autism, right? Where does that come from? How's that different in different cultural contexts? I know in Great Britain, the language used is, there's like a big difference between like the US and the UK context and then many other places. And how much are you able to do that in the space that you have to inhabit? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just piggyback off of that and say, the other side is if you feel you're an activist or an advocate, it seems better. Like I'm going into law school and I'm open with everybody. All the professors know, they're helping me with the whole entire process. Everyone in academia knows what I have. And I am not ashamed. It depends on who you are. I live openly. I am openly queer. I am openly brown. I am openly a person who lives with psychosis. And I don't feel I need to hide a part of me. So I really think that you have to know who you are and where you're at. Everybody's different. Everybody's a different space. For me, I live very vividly, and in academia, it's been actually, I've created a more supportive environment because I've been so open. Like I've been in very ableist spaces in law that they don't even know the word disability. They're like, huh? I don't really know much about it, but I choose to explain. And then they're like, oh, wow, okay, so let me see if I can connect you with resources. How can I help you? And then they really go that extra mile for me. So I think it's really knowing who you are, where you stand, and what you're capable of when it comes to advocacy and activism.
But just to like go off of that, I think it's it highly depends on the type of institution you're at, because where I'm at, we're in rural Pennsylvania, and a lot of my students and administration are very conservative and not accepting of marginalized identities. So I think sometimes it's great to be open about your intersectional identities and such, but I think in certain places you might get a lot of pushback on that, which is why I'm not open about my psychiatric diagnoses with my students and professors. So yeah, I'm just saying it highly depends on where you're at in the world.
Right, and then that raises the issue though about things that we can hide and things that we can't hide, and there's also there's problematic aspects of that too, to kind of interrogate the idea of, oh well, I can't hide this, but then there are things that we can't hide too. So, okay, I think we have about 5 minutes left in our time today. Is there another question that we could take from someone who is part of this dialogue who hasn't asked a question yet or spoken yet? I just want to start there. And otherwise, I see things in the chat here that maybe I could go to. Tamar, did you want to speak about this? I know that you're writing in the chat, and I'm.
Yeah, I was just thinking. A lot of this was on my mind. I work as a lived experience practitioner, which is basically someone who uses, I suppose it's the insight from lived experience within the work that they do, but you're doing it kind of openly. So, like peer support workers and what have you. Although I don't work as a peer support worker, but one thing I found is like really, really bad, horrific kind of discrimination. So this is like having to work 10 times harder. I mean, kind of being, sort of mixed race, disabled, whatever, but it's nothing quite like working openly within a mental health services and being open about your mental health. There's something about that is, you can, yeah. And anyway, I just like it. All I can say is it's so bad. And this show, I'd ended up after not being in hospital since 2005. I'd ended up hospitalised for a month. Kind of a couple of overdoses, 2 seizures, kind of like just really, really bad. And a lot of that had come from just basically really deciding, actually, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm going to kind of like really, really, just kind of make a stand and kind of, this is going to go, even if it goes to, tribunal court, this is, people are going to have to really just be accountable for their actions. So in doing that and thinking I could, manage it, I've sort of ended up in hospital for all the people that I was trying to, be there for who'd ended up in hospital. But it was one of the things where I was talking about the language of exclusion. That's because everything I've done, all that academia, all this working with like, King's College, UCL, doing research, kind of all the stuff that I've done behind the scenes of working, so I work with the National Health Service, and kind of basically, ending up being the board of the British and Irish group for the study of personality disorder, all this stuff. And yet I come back and kind of worth shit at work sort of thing. So again, coming back to the exclusionary language, I was just thinking that what I've been doing at work was basically, really over trying to over justify everything, case studies, kind of like documents, kind of, just things. And I've started to realise in these steering groups, other people don't have to do that. They just say something and it is. And a lot of the time they're saying something and it is, and actually it isn't. That doesn't fit in with like, practice or, research or theory or what have you, So I've kind of got to the point where I thought, do you know what? These rules don't apply to us. You can have all your case studies, you can have all your, you can do everything. And in the end, you're having to justify so much. People don't hear what the actual message is underneath. So, yeah, I think I just got to the point where it's just like, fuck it, you're gonna have to listen and do it, and I'm just gonna say it as it is, cut the bullshit. I can back it up with whatever references you want to have, or what have you, but this is it. And so I just wondered, anyone else tried doing that? Because you just get to the point where you think, do you know what, I'm my shit at work, I would earn more if I went off and went stacking shelves at the local Home and Foods or something. So do you know what? I've got nothing to lose. I'm just as well qualified as you guys working as directors and what have you. You've got your mortgages to lose, but I can say stuff that you can't. And it's really, I think when you just drop it, you find actually you've got so much power. And there's people there that they want to say this stuff and they can't say it because they've got their mortgage and they're paying for their kids' private education and stuff. I'm like, I'm so poor, it don't matter.
Because I don't want us to all be cut.
Sorry.
I don't know. No, this is wonderful. I know that we only have until I think
mute me.
If one of our panelists or two of our panelists want to make a final response or remark, I think we have to wrap up in just a moment.
I just want to say, for many of us, activists in different spaces, we often in professional roles, right, we have to refer to ourselves as people of lived experience. We can't talk about the living experience. I mean, forbid that we have, any form of active distress right now, even though it's true. So I just wanted to say that that's very true as well, and that there's at least solidarity amongst one another.
Any other final remarks from our panelists here as we wrap up? I just want to thank everyone who is in this space with us today for this wonderful dialogue, and especially to our panelists for sharing your expertise and your hearts and all of the care that you put into being here. And I hope that this space will be something that we can learn from. When we make this recording public, hopefully this can inform future dialogues that happen. And again, I'm grateful for everyone who's here, and I have a good day, and take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a lot to think about. I was so happy to hear everyone speak. So, thank you. I hope you'll join us for some of the rest of the day today.
Thank you, Delphine. Thank you, Ajilsa. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Amy.
Stop the recording now. Bye, Delphine.
Bye.